Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am here for my LPL mid-season player rankings for the 2022 summer split. If you haven't checked out some of the other videos that I've posted in the last couple of days, I've been doing my player rankings for all four of the major regions. LEC went up on Thursday, LCS up on Friday. Hello, Saturday. It is LPL time. And I'm very excited about this one. This one is going to be definitely a little bit of an undertaking. All 17 teams, all 5 starters, plus some, are going to be talked about here. So if you are interested and excited for content like that, let me know down in the comment section below. One little disclaimer, a lot of the player rankings in these videos are, of course, my opinion. Actually, all of them are. So if you disagree, that's awesome. Let me know down in the comment section below who you think is too low, who you think is too high, what teams you think are too low, what teams you think are too high. I love chatting it up with you guys. You all know that. So if you have that kind of, conversation, you want to have that kind of conversation, I'd love to have that down in the comment section below. But I don't want to waste too much time. The LPL is quite, like I said earlier, an undertaking to get through with all 17 teams. So let's go ahead and get started as quickly as we can. We're going to be going in order of my current power rankings. If you haven't seen my most recent episode of LPL Weekly Reviews, we will be going over all of these teams from 17 to 1 in order from how I rank them after the current week of games. Obviously, this all started because Riot took a little bit of a break for LCS and LEC, but I figured why not do all 4 of the major regions while we were at it. So let's go ahead and kick this one off with number 17 in my personal power rankings right now, and that is no surprise to anybody. It's going to be Team WE, Team World Elite, coming in at number 17. They're 0-7 right now. They look completely inept, at least in comparison to the rest of the league, and there's a good reason for that. So let's go over what the roster's looking like. It's looking like Biu in the top lane, Beishong in the jungle, Shanks in the mid lane, SMLZ at AD carry, and then Heal at support. Obviously, they've played a few different people here in different positions. GA in the mid lane. SMLZ's taking some games off here for Jing. But outside of that, this is their main 5, and they just haven't been able to get it done. Let's go ahead and talk about what you're seeing on the screen. Of course, you're seeing the team name, and you're going to see all the players with a number below them. That number represents where I personally rank them from 1 to 17 in terms of their position in the league. Of course, some positions are going to be more stacked than others, especially here in the LPL. The mid lane pool is pretty ludicrously good. So if you see some players that maybe are ranked a little bit lower than you would expect, usually it's just because, holy crap, being number 7 in the mid lane position is probably a higher compliment than being number 7 in any other position kind of thing. So I'll usually point that out when there is one, but we're going to go ahead and talk about these players. I'll go from top to support here with World Elite. Biu in the top lane. They brought him in, obviously, as a stabilizing force. They had a really good roster last year, and they weren't able to retain a lot of the people that made that roster good, most notably their top and bot lane here. And Biu comes in as what was hopefully going to be a good replacement, but he has just not been that on pretty much any level. I've talked about this in a few of my weekly reviews, but Biu is one of those players that is never going to stop trying to win the game on his own, which means that if he's not ahead and if he's not given a ton of resources, or alternatively, if his team is very behind, he can look really, really bad. And that's essentially what's happened all year long. He's pretty clearly been the worst player in the LPL so far in 2022. I don't think that is entirely indicative of Biu and how good he is, but it really is tough for him to be a successful top laner the way he plays if everything's not funneling through him, which is what we kind of saw on a few of his other rosters. So, yeah, Biu comes in as my last ranked top laner just because, man, he will lose you games by himself. And he's done that a lot for World Elite so far this year. You retain a couple of people from your good team last year here in Beishong and Shanks. I was pretty high on Beishong going into the year. He's certainly had his ups and downs, a lot of downs in 2022, but he has shown in the past to be a competent jungler and honestly a pretty good one, an all-pro caliber jungler in the LPL when he has a good team around him. He does not have that good team though right now, and he is definitely showing it. There are times where very similar to Bew, he will try plays that just will not work because he doesn't have the backup and he doesn't have the support to be able to make that work. So, Beishang, I think, is talented, but just, I don't think it's going to come out on this team. Shanks definitely showed a lot of improvement over 2021, but pretty much all of that is gone in 2022. He's just kind of been fine. He's been meh. He pretty much gets outclassed in every laning phase that he's in, which is unfortunate to say because he had a really good playoffs, but he's not been able to turn that into anything even remotely resembling regular season success. So he's fine in the mid lane there. I don't think he's like a huge negative for your team, but he's not a huge positive either. And then this is likely the worst bot lane in the LPL as well. SMLZ comes back out of retirement, I think, for this, and I don't know. This team sucks. He's actually not very good. It's not like he's made the team better at all. He's really a player that is good in laning phase. He can survive in laning phase and go toe-to-toe with a lot of good AD carries, but as soon as you hit that 15-minute mark, like, he just plays so passive that it gets to the point where it's even really difficult to justify having him in the lineup sometimes. Heal hasn't been a huge negative. He just hasn't been a positive for this team either. They lose pretty much every 2v2 that they take, and so it's just difficult for me to rank either of them above, you know, pretty much anybody else in the league because they've all been relatively more consistent than they have been. So, yeah, this WE team just in total, I think, is struggling for obvious reasons, and I don't really expect that to turn around at any point this year. Moving on to number 16 here in my power rankings. Number 16 for me is going to be Invictus Gaming. IG coming in here at number 16. They have not had a very good start to the year. There was definitely some hope that this roster would be able to turn something around, but that has clearly not been the case with how they played. Their roster from top to supports looking like Zika in the top lane, Jun in the jungle, Yuakai in the mid lane, Wink at AD carry kind of on is there as well, and then Jinlu at support, formerly known as Lucas. Wink plays there a little bit as well. Definitely an interesting team here. I think, I don't want to say that the problems entirely lie in two specific areas for this team because I don't think you are this bad if you only have two problem areas, but really there are two areas to me where this team drastically underperforms the rest of the league. Number one is the bot lane, just in general, whether it's Wink and Jinlu, whether it's On and Wink, whoever has been playing there, they've been the worst bot lane in the league. I know I just talked about that with WE, but Invictus, I think, is a little bit more detrimental. WE just doesn't, like, they're a negative in the fact that they add nothing positive, really, to your late game. Whereas, I think Invictus Gaming has actively been a negative, even in, like, especially in laning phase. They just don't play the early games particularly well, and they get trounced because of it. Honestly, good bot lanes will destroy this team 10 times out of 10. Wink has easily been the worst AD carry in the league. He's been the worst support in the league as well. This is somebody who actually had a pretty promising start to his career on eStar. I want to say like 2 years ago now, but ever since he joined IG, he has just kind of fallen off of a cliff in terms of his ability to actually win lane and translate that into anything remotely seeing wins mid-game. So yeah, he's been meh, or bad at worst. Jinlu's been fine. We've seen so little of him. He's certainly been better than Wink is at support. But at the same time, it's not like he's ever really been a huge positive for this team. Even last year, he was still relatively, like, not great when they were really pushing. When he was given his playing time as they really tried to figure out what to do with this bottom lane. He's never stepped up to the potential that I think a lot of IG fans put on him, and I think it's really, they're probably in my opinion, the biggest in-game reason that this team is struggling so much. I think another big reason is just the coaching decisions, and like I was talking about with who they play in the bottom lane, I think their drafts have been relatively awful, especially compared to the rest of the league. They're consistently outdrafted. I think those two problems are very difficult to overcome. It's not to say they don't have any good players. I actually think the top side of this map is pretty interesting. You have Zika in the top lane, a prospect that I'm a little bit lower on, I think, than the consensus. A lot of people have him as kind of a really strong up-and-coming LPL top laner. I'm not sure he's ever going to be like a top-level LPL top laner in the same way that I think someone like, we'll talk about Shanji later. I think those two get compared a lot. I don't think Zika's quite on that level, but I certainly think he's better than the rest of the team around him is showing. And I certainly feel that way about Jun, who has kind of been hard stuck on this team all year long. I think Jun's a good player. He's a very aggressive player that can win you games in the LPL. I think the problem has just been that he has pretty much no teammate like that can play with him. Top lane's just not the position that can do it right now, and Zika is easily the second best player on this team. You have Yukai in the mid lane, someone who I think has shown a lot of promise in the LDL, and then came up to the LPL. This team sucks. He hasn't exactly made them better. It's hard to know if that's his fault or if it's just, sometimes being on a bad team just makes you worse. It happens. So, yeah, it's really hard to give any sort of insight onto this Invictus Gaming team other than they are being heavily dragged down by the fact that their bot lane is just not good in any circumstance. Their drafts are not great. And while they do have some really good young talent here in Zika, Jun, and then occasionally Yukai, I think all of that to me is just relatively overshadowed by the fact that, well, they just aren't going to be winning games. I do think that there is something to build off of here if you're an IG fan, but, it's certainly not the roster that a historic organization in the LPL like this wants to field at this point in time. Moving on to number 15 in my power rankings. Number 15 for me is going to be another team that I think a lot of people are disappointed by, and that is Rare Atom. A team that actually made playoffs last split, but you certainly would not know it with how they are playing here. Their roster from top to support is Cube in the top lane, Leon in the jungle, Strive in the mid lane, iBoy at AD carry, and Yuyanja at support. I'm going to give myself a little bit of a pat on the back for this one. I was definitely ahead of the curve when it came to Rare Atom regression, not only from last year, but especially going into the split. I thought they way overperformed themselves due to a lot of weird results in spring, and they were definitely due to fall a little bit more back down to earth, and that is, so far, at least for sure, been proven right. They have looked not good at all, really, you can blame it on a few things, but let's go over what their players are. I think there is some positives to take away from this team. I like Cube in the top lane. I think he's a good player. I think he's right around that same level that, like, a lot of other good but not great top laners are in the LPL. He's not someone that's going to push your team over the top, but if you need to win, like, if you need to be, like, a mid to bottom tier playoff team, Cube is definitely someone that you can have on your team, and that's not going to hurt you. He's just not someone, I think, that's ever going to, like, propel your team to being a playoff team if they're not great around them. Leon has shown positives and he's shown negatives. He was really good in spring. He was the biggest reason I think this team overperformed in spring was how good Leon was playing, but he's actually been pretty underwhelming so far in summer. I think this is probably a little bit closer to his total skill level, at least compared to the rest of the league. But if he were to jump back up to, say, like 11 or 10 in terms of my jungle rankings, I wouldn't be ridiculously surprised. He's just certainly not playing like that right now. He's a good player that has some level of experience winning in the LPL, or at least being relatively successful in the LPL, and I think that's definitely worth something. I just don't know if he's quite as good as his previous records would attribute. Strive in the mid lane he's a youngster that I kind of like. He's shown a lot of good things, especially in spring. Him and Leon's connection was probably the biggest reason this team overperformed and were able to beat a lot of the teams that they really shouldn't have been beating last split. But Strive has really, not that he's taken a huge step back in the same way that Leon has, he's just taken a little bit of a step back in summer here. Not quite as consistent in laning phase, and not quite as consistently around the map. I think they really liked playing through him in spring, and they've really kind of gone away from that. They really want to keep doing it. Like, obviously, draft-wise, they've tried to keep going towards it, but I think teams have kind of figured out Rare Atom and realized they're a little bit of a one-trick pony in terms of how they have played, and so, you know, we'll see what happens with Strive and Leon. Hopefully they can kind of get back on track of being closer to what they were 4 months ago rather than what they are now, but you know, I have to grade them on where I project them, and for Leon and Strive, I think they're going to be somewhere in the middle of where that performance was, which is, I think, where they're at now. iBoy and Yuyanja, they've been incredibly disappointing this split. Not that they were phenomenal in spring. I think they were fine. iBoy has definitely had this slow decline. You know, obviously one of the more historic players here in the LPL, long time Worlds representative on EDG, just many time LPL playoff contender, right? He comes over to Rare Atom, and he was pretty good at the beginning of his tenure here. He's gotten to the point where he is the weakness of this roster. Him and Yuyanja, I think, pretty consistently lose lane and lose late game as well. iBoy has this weird tendency to just get caught randomly for no reason, at least once a game. Hopefully he can figure that out. This is something that he's developed for sure recently. I'm not sure if it's burnout. I'm not sure if it's just, not expecting this team to be able to win, confidence, whatever it is, right? But his focus has seemed to started to, it's really, really been lacking in the last few weeks is really what I'm trying to say. Yuyanja's never been someone that I've been incredibly high on, even on his Worlds run on Top Esports. I never thought Yuyanja was a particularly great support. I think he's been carried a lot by good teammates, and I think that's starting to show a little bit here. Him and iBoy just don't have really the synergy or the connection or the talent. I don't want to say the talent because that sounds mean, but like they're just not on the same level to make this team where it needs to be. They've definitely been the weak point of this roster, and that's unfortunate to say. Do I think this team can step up? Yeah, I think they're probably better than this, right? They're probably better than 15. I'm just not sure, like, I don't think they're better than 12 or something like that. They're probably closer to 13 or somewhere around there, but they're going to have to show it because right now they are certainly not. The bot lane has been a huge weight for the rest of this team, and they don't really have anybody else here that's going to be that carry. Everybody needs to hold their own end of the spectrum here, like their own weight of the equation, and right now they're just not doing that. If you have players that are underperforming like they are right now, they're just going to tumble down the standings like they have. So yeah, I think they can get back up to a respectable position, but I certainly don't think this team is nearly as good as people thought they were just 3 months ago. Moving on to my number 14 team here in the power rankings. We're looking at a team that I think is probably overperforming, maybe not in terms of record, but in terms of how they're actually playing, and that for me is LGD Gaming. This is a team that really struggles for talent, but has certainly put together, some compelling series, even if they haven't been able to win them. Their roster from top to support is looking like Fairness or Chalizi in the top lane, Shadow in the jungle, Yeji or Haichao in the mid lane, Awesome at AD carry, and then Jinzhao at support. They're alright. I mean, really, there's not a ton I can say about this team. I think on paper, you would expect this team to be a bottom 1 or 2 team in the league, and for most of the year, they have been. I think they're performing a little bit better recently. I have, the addition of Awesome to this team. I think he's really added an element that they didn't have before. He's pretty quickly become their best player at AD carry here. They've started to play through him, and he's shown that they at least have some level of competence around that. And I think that's good. Maybe if he was on a better team, I would think a little bit higher of him, but it's not like this team's winning. Anyways, I just think Awesome looks good, fine. I don't think Jinzhao next to him is particularly great. This is someone who, this is his first year playing support competitively, so, I think in that case, he's done a relatively good job, at least compared to others that we've seen in a similar situation. But, I still think that bot lane isn't great. Even with Awesome playing better, I don't think they're necessarily, a bot lane that can win you games by themselves, kind of bot lane, and nobody else in this team is really winning them games. You've got Shadow in the jungle, and Shadow is fine. He's okay. I think 16 maybe undersells him a tad, because he's okay. He can play. He's certainly not going to win you games by himself, but he's fine. He's not a negative for this team. In fact, I would probably, other than Awesome, I would consider him this team's biggest asset. He's been fine. Certainly not someone that I think will ever be on a top LPL team, but not someone who I think is he's one of the top 17 players in the region, for sure, at least in my opinion. And then you've got the solo lanes, which they just haven't really been able to decide on. I think they're settling in on Yeji in the mid lane. I talked about this in my weekly reviews a bit. He's a little bit more of that supportive style mid laner, as opposed to Haichao, who's more of a carry. He's more of a focal point. I think Yeji is someone who's going to look better on better teams, and that's unfortunate because this LGD team is not good. They don't have the talent to make that work, but he's really good at the Lissandras, at the Gallios, these picks that are a little bit more of, I can't solo carry the game, but I'm definitely going to help play the game, the Swains. I think that he could theoretically be an asset to a higher tier team. Him on this team, I do think he's the right option to play. I think he's the best mid laner they have, but I certainly don't think it's going to help them get wins. And then as for the Fairness versus Chalizi debate, Fairness is fine, Chalizi is fine, or at least what he's shown has been fine. Honestly, it really doesn't seem to have mattered. You know what I mean? They're both just kind of there. So, yeah, if whatever this LGD team wants to do, I don't think they're going to be higher than this at any point in the year. They just don't have the talent. Like I said, this is a bottom 2 team when it comes to talent. They have overperformed, I think, everybody's expectations, and they are better, or they've been better than the 3 teams below them. Don't get me wrong. Like, they've been better than Rare Atom. They've been better than Invictus. They've been better than WE. All of whom should be better than this LGD team. So that in some way is some sort of accomplishment, but at the end of the day, it's awesome as some sort of prospect, you know, somebody that you think you could actually develop. Shadow to an extent, but not really. And then everybody else is just kind of meh. So yeah, I mean, they're going to be happy with 14 at the end of the day, and hopefully they can figure it out for next year. Moving on to my number 13 team in my power rankings, a team that I really wish I could have higher, but they just haven't played up to it. That is going to be Ultra Prime, up in 13. A team that I really want to place as like a playoff team in terms of what they are on paper, but they just, at every turn, they feel disappointing, and they aren't able to completely come together in the way that you would want. So let's talk about what their roster is looking like. It's looking like Zoom in the top lane, Hacker in the jungle, Cryan in the mid lane, Elk at AD carry, and Shalcy at support. There are positives to this team. There absolutely are. Let's talk about them. I think Elk is really good. He is hard stuck on this Ultra Prime team. He's taken a little bit of a step back here in summer, mostly because I think he's just tired. But go watch like all of this team's spring series. It is 1v9 Elk versus the world. And it's really frustrating to watch because he has been so good for this team, and I don't think he's going to get any credit for it because they're not winning. But if he were on a top team, he would be considered one of the 3 to 5 best AD carries in the league. There are so many good AD carries in the league that, unfortunately for me, he falls down to 9 just with how he's played this year. I'll give you a little spoiler peek. He's right below players like Hwanfong and Photic. Like, players who have been really good for a while. That tells you what I think of Elk. I think he's a really solid player, and someone who I think, like I said, on a good team would look like a great player, but just, he's not going to be able to show that this year. Hopefully he gets a chance to show that later. Him and Shalcy do have a relatively good synergy. Fortunately, Shalcy is still Shalcy. He will sometimes just put himself in really bad positions, even when they're ahead. It's not necessarily a giant negative, but it is something that I am considering a bad thing. You know, he's a good player, but he's got the negatives, right? Like, it's not a giant one to the point where I think he's like a negative towards your team, but him and Elk aren't going to ever be the best bot lane in the league or anything like that, just because I think Shalcy gets himself into too much trouble every so often. I think the other big plus of this team for me is Cryan in the mid lane. This is someone who I think was really looked down upon after the Worlds run last year for RNG. Comes over to Ultra Prime, definitely a downgrade in terms of team. Shows you what his market was. And then he's actually outperformed expectations for me here. He's pretty consistently been a top 8 to 10 mid laner in the league. He's been able to go up against some of the best mids in the league in lane and be able to hold his own. I think that's a huge positive. He actually looks a little bit more complete as a player than I think he was last year on RNG. He just doesn't quite have the team around him that is able to, I don't know, keep that, raise up his prospects, if you will. He doesn't have the team to make him look as good now that he did last year. But Cryan and Elk, I think, are both players that Ultra Prime can keep and actually build around, because I really think those two are two players you can have on a team if you want to be a top 4 to 5 team in the region. I think both of them are totally capable of being in a program like that if you have the right players around them, which, right now they don't. We talked about Shalcy. Let's talk about Hacker. Hacker has probably been the worst player on this team all year long. He's probably been the worst jungler in the league. I have him ranked as the worst jungler in the league, which is really sad to say because I think last year he was really starting to show some growth. And even in spring, he was starting to show some growth of being a little bit better. Every single split, it felt like he was marginally getting better and better and better. And eventually he was going to make his way up to being a competent, LPL jungler. But he took an absolute nosedive towards the end of spring. And that has fully continued here in summer. Ever since then, he has clearly been the worst jungler in the league. He gets out-jungled, out-pressured every single game. Doesn't really matter what pick he's on. It doesn't really matter what pick his opponent is on. he can't really seem to be able to control any matchup right now, and it's unfortunate to say. I don't want to say Hacker's the biggest problem that Ultra Prime has, but definitely on the Rift, he's the biggest problem that they've had recently of, if they have a better jungler, I think they're close to a playoff team. If not outright just a playoff team. I do think Hacker is holding them back that much. But you've got Zoom in the top lane. Man, Zoom is such an interesting case, right? Obviously, a former top-tier top laner in the league for LGD Gaming goes over to top last split. Gets replaced by Wayward halfway through, and Wayward's way, way better. He comes over to Ultra Prime for his starting spot, and he's just been not so great. He's going to fall all the way down to number 12 in my top lane rankings. He's fine. Not great, not bad, whatever. He's just kind of there now. It's definitely disappointing knowing how great he used to be, but we have to accept that the Zoom that we knew is no longer the player that is here. It's an unfortunate thing to have to deal with, but he's not going to absolutely cost this team games, although he has had some real stinkers so far this year. He's just not going to be a plus. He really isn't going to be a plus for a mid-table team, which is sad to say. There is a world in which I could see him getting back to maybe half of what he was before, and that puts him closer to the 7-8 mark. There's also a world in which I could see him getting worse, because honestly, 12 might be generous for how he has played recently. There are some players that are under him, like Zika, that have been better than him, but I'm relying on Zoom to kind of at least remotely pull it together at some point. I think he will at least get it together in a stable sense. I'm not sure if he's ever going to be that guy again, but I think he'll be stable for the rest of the year. That puts Ultra Prime in 13th. They're a team with high highs here in Elk and Cryan to an extent, and low lows here. Hacker, Zoom have certainly been bad. Shousey has moments where he's awful. He also has moments where he's good, but moments where he's awful. This team is just too inconsistent for me to put them any higher than this. Like I said, there are teams higher than this that I think they are certainly more talented than, but in terms of how they are playing, I think 13 is really as high as I'm willing to go at this point. Moving on to my number 12 team here in the power rankings, we start to get to some teams that have actually shown quite a bit of interesting things throughout the split. That's going to kick off with TT Gaming, ThunderTalk Gaming here, coming in at number 12, way, 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 way higher than I ever expected them to hit in this season. And we'll talk about why in a second, but let's go over what the roster's looking like. It's looking like Hoya in the top lane, Beishwan in the jungle, Yucal in the mid lane, Kepler at ADC, and Yao Yao at support. Let's talk about the two members of the team that have been here all year long, Beishwan and Yucal. They've been really good. Honestly, they were the lifeblood of this team, even when they were really bad. Yucal certainly had some bad performances this year, but at the end of the day, these two are relatively consistent. Yucal, obviously a former top player in the world, coming over here has definitely lost a little bit of that luster for ThunderTalk. He lost it a year or so ago, but, you know, it's definitely being shown off here on ThunderTalk. He's just kind of been an okay mid laner in the LPL. I think at his worst in spring, he was one of the worst mid laners in the region. I think he's definitely gotten a lot better in summer, and he's really solidified, I think, what his positives are, which is the fact that he's still pretty good in lane, and he's not awful at translating that into something later, but he does need leads in order to look good. He started to get more leads, which is a positive, but like when you need those leads, I think it can definitely be a little difficult. As for Beishwan, he's honestly just been super consistent all year long. 13 seems a little low for how well he's played, but there are just so many good junglers in the LPL. It's hard to place him above this. I do think he's a solid player, and I honestly think he's probably better than pretty much anybody else on this team in terms of talent level. But he's carried them to some wins, especially recently in summer. A lot of their wins have come off the back of him. Before they changed out their bottom lane, he was like the bright, shining light of this team. And it's good to see him finally get some help with this switched out bottom lane. Obviously, Puff and Southwind are out. Kepler and Yao Yao are in, and they look like a huge improvement. Ever since they joined this team has certainly found a much more powerful identity in terms of how they want to play their bot lane. Kepler and Yao Yao are just better players, especially Yao Yao coming in over Southwind. Yao Yao's honestly been a huge surprise to me. As he's really been phenomenal at support. They've played very few games, I will say this. They've played 2 series as of making this video, and that is not a lot. It is certainly not something where I'm like, oh, they're easily like top whatever. Like, there is certainly some projection here with how they played, but their 2 series that they've played, they've looked like, a competent mid-level LPL bot lane, which I think is certainly an upgrade over to what Puff and Southwind were offering you, which was just not a lot. Kepler, I didn't talk about him much. He's fine. I think Yao Yao's a little bit more of a takeover player than Kepler is, but Kepler has been really, really good playing off of Yao Yao. Those two have really good synergy together in the two series that I've seen so far. It's just hard to rank them super high because, again, we've seen so little. And then you bring in Hoya in here into the top lane. Hoya, I think, is going to be playing full-time now here. I think that's the right decision. I think he's clearly the better top laner here. But he is someone who has always been a little bit of a disappointment, whether it's been on, Fred at Breon, whether it's been on Damwon last split. He's someone who I think has been brought in and expected to fill shoes that are a little bit too big for him. He's been put on the ThunderTalk team where I think the expectations were low, and he's been fine. He's not necessarily been a positive, he's not necessarily been a negative, but when you have players like Beishuan, Yucal, Kepler, and Yao Yao are really starting to step up, for him to not be a negative, I think there is an opportunity for this team to even be closer to playoffs. And if you would have told ThunderTalk Gaming fans that at the beginning of the year, that there was no shot. There was absolutely no shot this team was going to be making playoffs. I certainly wouldn't have expected that, but these changes have been mostly positive for them. Yucal has gotten back on track. Kepler and Yao Yao have been pluses. Beishuan has continued to be great. Hoya has been a more stabilizing force in the top lane. Overall, I think TT is pretty underrated at this point. I know a lot of people aren't going to consider them like a very good team, but I think they're closer to OMG and Anyone's Legend and even someone like a Bilibili Gaming than I think they are to like WE and Invictus Gaming at the bottom. This team definitely shows signs of life, and I think realistically, do I think they'll make playoffs? No, there's a reason they're out of playoffs in my predictions, but there's something about this team that is destined to overperform, and if they start to take some games off of teams they shouldn't, you wouldn't see me, being completely surprised. Jumping into our final non-predicted playoff team here in my power rankings. This one's a surprise to a lot of people. I know a lot of people are definitely hoping that this team can be better than this, but for me, this is the level they played up to. Number 11 for me is going to be Bilibili Gaming, BLG, coming in here at number 11. They just don't look like a playoff team right now. There's really no other way to put it until they can prove that they are a playoff team. This is where they're going to be. So let's look at their roster from top to support. You've got Bin in the top lane, Weiwei in the jungle, Fofo and Icon, kind of splitting time in the mid lane. Doggo and Rise here at AD carry, and then Crisp at support. Let's talk about the AD carry position first and foremost, because I have Rise listed here, but Doggo's played the entire year. Rise just came in for his first series the day of recording here on Wednesday the 13th. But, yes, let's... Doggo's been... I don't want to toot my own horn on this one too much, but Doggo has been a disappointment to a level where I'm not sure you can play him if you want to be a playoff team. He has been very bad for BLG over and over and over again. And it's held this team back from a lot. He's not the only player. I don't want it to seem like he's the only player, but he doesn't seem to have any sort of synergy with Crisp. They don't work together well at all. It's not like Crisp doesn't have this legacy of being one of the better supports in the region the last few years or anything. But Rise coming in, I know very little about Rise. If he can come in and be better than Doggo, great. If not, this 10th place ranking that I've given them is for Doggo, is for how Doggo has played. He's been probably the 10th best ADC in the region. I think you could argue he's been worse than that, but for now, that's where he is for me. If Rise can come in and be better than that, great. If not, this team is in trouble. This team really is in trouble because this AD carry position has been a problem all year long for them. Even when Uzi was in, it's not like Uzi was completely tearing the world up. I think that was a big reason why he didn't want to come back. Was because if he wasn't going to be a top 2 or 3 AD carry, I'm not sure he was really that interested in playing. And really, he wasn't going to be a top 2 to 3 AD carry. He was fine, but he wasn't great, right? And Crisp being here, Crisp has definitely taken a step back, definitely from last year, and even from just what he has been normally. This is someone who, like I said earlier, has been one of the better supports in the region for quite a while now, and he just hasn't been that on BLG. He's been very inconsistent. There are games that he is just not good in. Certainly something that you wouldn't expect from Crisp. But bot lane's far from the only problem that this team has. Mid lane is certainly something that they have to figure out. Fofo's been playing most of the season, but they brought Icon in, and he's been playing a bit as well. Both of them are bad. There's really no way to put it. I actually personally prefer Icon, but Fofo's been playing a little bit more, so he's going to be up on the graphic. I think Icon's the better player. I think Icon offers you a little bit more. Fofo has to be ahead in order to even remotely be playable. Whereas I think Icon does a little bit better from even and from behind to be that more supportive player if you want to put resources into Bin or if you want to put resources into Ryze. If you do need a mid laner that is going to carry the game, though, I understand why they feel Fofo would be better for that. I just think Fofo's been garbage all year long. He's been an extreme disappointment coming off of the best year of his career. He gets this big, money contract to play for BLG, and he's bad. He just sucks. Like, there's really no other way to put it. It's not like he's just been average. He's been bad. He's been a bad mid laner. He's losing matchups, and if he's not ahead, he's really not able to play from behind. So, something to look out for there. Like I said, I think Icon gives you a much higher floor as a player, but Fofo probably gives you a higher ceiling. Weiwei in the jungle, someone who I've always been a little bit more down on than I think the rest of the league. I think he's a good player. I don't think he's a great player. He is someone who I think will look better the better teammates you put around him. And right now, the teammates around him aren't performing, so I think he's looking a lot worse. That's not just... honestly, my opinion on Weiwei has not changed that much from the beginning of the year. I think a lot of people were very surprised to see how low he was in my spring preseason player rankings. And I think a lot of people might be surprised to see how high he is in these rankings. Really, for me, it's just the fact that he's fine. He's somebody who's going to be there to help your team out, but he's never going to push your team over the top. He'll take risks, but not in a way that will alter the game too much, especially when you have players like Fofo who can win or lose you the game, or a player like Doggo who will win or lose you the game. I don't think Weiwei is going to be that kind of player for BLG. He hasn't been all year long, and so really my opinion of him hasn't changed that much, even though he's had a down year. I think he's a lot closer to my expectation than a lot of people expected. I'm actually pretty proud of that player ranking. And then you have Bin here in the top lane. I still think Bin's a really good player. Obviously, he's just coming off of a split where he won MSI. No big deal or anything. But gets traded for Breathe here. Obviously, sucks for him because he's going to the worst team. Breathe is the better player, though. He gets swapped for pretty much the only top laner I would consider an upgrade to how he was. I still think he's one of the best top laners in the world. I think it's unfortunate that Bilibili Gaming is a complete train wreck right now, because if they just played through him, I really think that this team would have a much better shot at winning. I think his mechanics are great. I just think top lane's a really difficult role to take over the game from right now. I've talked about that in pretty much every video recently. Top lane's just not a carry role at the moment, and that's unfortunate because I think he is clearly their best player. Even at the weakest role in the LPL, I think he's clearly been the best player on this team. So as for the outlook of this team, like I said, this team wants to be top 5, top 6, right? Like they, at the beginning of the year, they wanted to be a Worlds team. Right now, I don't even have them in playoffs. So yes, they really need to turn a lot of stuff around. Do I think that it's possible? Absolutely. Like, this team has the talent. Fofo was a top 3 mid laner in the league last year. Crisp is one of the better supports. I still think Bin's one of the better top laners. If Ryze can come in and be better than Doggo was, just be stable, Weiwei's going to look better if all those players step up. I definitely still think there's a shot that they're a good team, but so far they've proven absolutely none of that. And so until they can prove at any point that they are not a non-playoff team, until they can show up and beat non-playoff teams, they're going to be sitting here at 11 and they're going to be in the out looking in. Now we actually get to start jumping in to my predicted playoff teams for LPL Summer Split, at least as of right now. Coming in at number 10, a team that I think has steadily grown throughout the year, and they have a nice young core. I'm talking about OMG. Oh my god. They come in here at number 10. Like I said, a lot of really fun young players on this roster to talk about that are growing together as a unit. Let's go over what the roster is looking like. It's looking like Shanji in the top lane, Aki in the jungle, Cream in the mid lane, Abel at ADC, and then Cold at support. I really like this group. I really do. Let's start with the player that I think I've talked about maybe the most on my channel, and that's Cream, who I think is a superstar in the making. I know that there are a lot of people who certainly have their ups and downs on Cream, but to me, he's the most underrated player in the LPL. He is a bona fide star in the making in terms of how he's playing. I have him as my number 7 mid laner right now in the LPL, and he really is the driving force of this team. I get it. His playstyle is a little one-dimensional. A tad bit one-dimensional. Not incredibly, but a tad bit. He is much better on assassins than he is on control mages or more passive picks. But that's okay, because you know what? He can be the carry. He's the best player on the team. So I really don't have a problem with that right now. And in fact, he's gotten a lot better on those control mages. in spring, he really showed a side of him on like the Orianas that he was not showing before this year. I'm actually really high on Cream. I very much believe that there is a chance that in a year or two, we're talking about him as like the reason either this OMG team or whatever team he's on is going to Worlds. I think he's a player who has that kind of potential. So another player who has very high potential for me is Shanji up here in the top lane. I think he's one of the more interesting top lane prospects in the league. He was someone who I really wasn't sure how to judge at the beginning of the year, but he's really shown an ability to be comfortable playing his own style and not worrying about what the rest of the league is trying to do. Top lane, like I've talked about, is a position where you're either playing tanks or you're playing, team fighting, fighters. I don't know, Gwen is more of what I'm thinking there. Shanji has said he knows he doesn't have to do that. Not to say he's bad on tanks, honestly. I think he's a pretty good tank player. But obviously, in recent weeks, we've seen the Shyvana top come out, like the AP Shyvana top come out. We've seen some Rumble from Shanji. Like these picks that aren't necessarily meta, but he knows that he can take over the game on them. And he can do that. He's been one of the few top laners that has actively been able to win his team games so far in the LPL. Yes, he's not a complete package. There are some times where he just loses lane because he picks something super aggro and doesn't win. But I certainly think for a player as young as he is, the upside that he offers is well worth the risk that he gives you by picking those champions. I also really like both Aki and Abel here. Aki a little bit less so. Not to say he's a bad player. I just think his upside maybe gets a little overblown. I think he's a solid jungler. I think he is actually very similar, at least in like what his potential is, to someone we just talked about on BLG and Weiwei. I think he can be that kind of player. Where he can be a facilitator for the rest of the team, where he can take some risks and he can, carry the game if he has to, but really at the end of the day, the better players around him are going to make him look better, and the worse the players are around him, the worse he's going to look. So, I think right now he looks pretty good. He's not someone that I would necessarily rely on to carry my team if they started losing, but I think he's certainly a positive to this OMG team so far this year. And then Abel. Abel is maybe the best Samira in the world, and that's got to count for something. He's certainly working on his ability to play other non-hyper-aggressive picks in the bottom lane, but I still really like his outlook. There, again, I think very similar to Shanji are games where he just wins because he gets his pick or he gets his laning phase that he can win, and he just snowballs it out of control, and this team is off to the races. I really do like the core that they have together here. Cold is on this team. I know I haven't talked about him. He's not a negative. He's really just a neutral, veteran shot caller. I do sometimes worry about the macro on this team. That is the biggest weakness they have. I think all of them are very talented mechanical players, but sometimes I worry about their ability to play as a team because they do lose some games later on just from not having the experience. It definitely is a young team. That's definitely why you want Cold in there, and Aki helps with that as well, but that's definitely what Cold's purpose is, I think, on this roster, and he hasn't necessarily been able to stabilize it completely. I'm not going to blame it entirely on him, but definitely something worth noting. He's fine. He's a good support that isn't going to break the mold, but he's also not going to lose you games. Just a solid player there. And when you surround a player like that with 4 like really talented youngsters, especially Cream and Shanji, who I think can actually be superstars, like this OMG really is only going up. This OMG team, I should say. They've got to be very happy with the core they have. If I'm them, I'm doing as much as I can to keep them, or I'm taking $8 trillion bids for Cream and Shanji and using that money to reinvest in, making my team very good in the long term. But yeah, you've got some phenomenal youngsters on your hands. I just hope that they don't waste them, because I would hate to be sitting here in 2 years saying, ah, man, what could have been with this team? Moving on to number 9 in my power rankings, and certainly this has to be the front runner for a team that has most overperformed expectations going into this split, at least for me, and I have to imagine for most other people. Coming in at number 9 is going to be anyone's Legend, AL. Coming in all the way at number 9. Yeah, I know. They're 5-3, and they've beaten some really good teams. So let's go ahead and talk about what their roster is looking like. It's looking like ZDZ in the top lane, Xiao Hao in the jungle, Forge in the mid lane, Betty at ADC, and Chocho at support. This roster on paper should not be the 9th best team in the LPL. You can probably tell that from the numbers. Their numbers are looking a lot closer to what someone like Rare Adam was looking like than even someone like BLG that we already talked about. But they play together as a unit so well, so much better than almost any team we've talked about up to this point. And really, some of their players are playing way above their pay grade right now. We'll get to those first. The bot lane has been a huge source of carry potential for this Anyone's Legend team. Chocho is the best player on this team right now. He is someone who I've talked up for years. Him, like, I feel so vindicated to see him having such a good season, because Chocho, I think, in a lot of people's minds has been kind of a mid to below average support, you know, kind of in that vein of Cold, and even someone like a Xiaoxi, like in that vein of LPL mid laners. I always thought he had much more potential than that, and he's really shown that this split. He's been one of the better supports in the league so far in summer. He continues to show up and show out for this team, not only in lane, but making plays across the map. He has been integral in this team's success, and so is Betty. Betty is often the one assigned with being the late game carry for this Anyone's Legend team. Obviously, the ADC role is often given that distinction, but they put a lot into Betty, and he's really performed. He's had a couple up and down years ever since coming to the LPL, but this has to be one of the ones where he's been more consistently great, at least without the talent around him that he had maybe on his first couple of years here, but he's still been really, really solid. Honestly, him and Chocho have formed a very underratedly good bot lane duo here in the LPL, and I'm excited, and I really hope they can keep that up. The other player really outperforming, I think, his ranking here right now is Xiaohao in the jungle. I have him as number 13 in the jungle, which I think a lot of people can view as relatively disrespectful, and honestly, I can understand that. Like, he's played well above this 13 rank so far in summer. It's just about the consistency and about showing it for a long time with Xiaohao, because really, while he's been phenomenal, like, this is the first split where he's been phenomenal, and if he wants to show up and show out like that, like, maybe he can grow up to be like a 7 or an 8. I'm not sure he has the potential to be like a top 5 jungler in the region, but he's playing really, really well right now, and his ability to just relatively camp mid lane is really what the strategy has been for Anyone's Legend early game. It's worked out, and this team has benefited a lot from it. He has good map awareness, and him and Chocho link up for a lot of good macro plays. Forge in the mid lane has definitely also been a positive. He hasn't necessarily been a surprise. I think Forge was definitely the one that people were looking at on this team as like the young up-and-coming good player, and he's kind of, you know, proven that. He's been good. He hasn't been the carry of this team, but he does receive quite a bit of resources, and he is pretty active in the early game, which is something I really like to see out of mid laners. Someone who originally obviously was on a Rare Atom team. He was, I think, loaned to Anyone's Legend, and then they just bought him outright after last year, so he grew with this team a little bit last year, and I think they wanted to run it back, and he was really good in spring. He was the best player on this team in spring, and then they roll over here to summer, and everything really starts to click for the roster. He really has, like everybody else that I've talked about so far, Xiaohao, Betty, Chocho, I think have really amplified their play from spring, but Forge was already pretty good in spring, and I think he stayed good in summer. I think the team around him is just playing a lot better. As for ZDZ in the top lane, it's really hard for me to say. I mess it up all the time in the weekly recaps as well, but as for ZDZ in the top lane, he's fine. Again, another one of those top laners I've talked about where, because of the role is in the way that it is right now, he doesn't have a huge impact on the game, but that's fine. He's not going to take over the game. He's not going to lose you the game. He's just kind of there. He's a good team fighter, especially on tanks. He can play, you know, some more hyper picks every once in a while, but really, he's going to be on the more supportive style top laners, your Ornns, your Sejuanis, etc., etc. I think, and you're going to allow Xiaohao and Betty to be the ones that are more on those aggressive picks. Forge typically likes to lean into those, you know, the more control mage, like more staple, like Swain archetype picks. And then Chocho on roamers and engagers, I think, has always been his bread and butter. But, and he's gotten a lot better on enchanters, don't get me wrong. But I certainly don't think ZDZ is going to be relied upon to carry this team. And I think that's fine. I think that's a good thing for this roster overall, because you have so many players that I think are good with those resources, and ZDZ is very good without them. So, yes, this team is playing above their pay grade by a lot, quite a bit. Do I think they're going to be able to maintain it? I'm really not so sure right now. I really hope this team does end up making playoffs, because I think that would be awesome, and I'd be really, really excited for them. However, I'm not 100% sold that's going to happen. That's why they're still down here at number 9, even though they're 5-3 right now, 5th in the standings. I'm just not sold that they're a guaranteed playoff team, but if they continue to win against the teams that they've been beating regularly so far in summer, then they absolutely will be. Moving on to number 8 in my power rankings, we start to get to the teams that genuinely feel they should be closing in on a world spot, or at least in the conversation for a world spot. At the bottom of that for me, another team, we're going from a team that I think is overperforming to underperforming. We've got Edward Gaming, EDG. Yes, last year's world champions sitting down here at number 8. They just have not played very well so far in 2022. Even in spring, they weren't that great, but they've been even worse in summer, so let's talk about it. Their lineup is looking like Flandre in the top lane, JJ in the jungle, Scout in the mid lane, Viper at ADC, and Mako at support. If you recognize this roster, that's because this is the same exact 5 that won the World Championship last year. No changes have been made, and yet they continue to struggle quite a bit. Let's talk about the one member of this team that I really haven't been worried about most of the year, and that's Viper, who has, honestly, even when they struggled, still looked really, really good. And a lot of people are going to contest this, but I still have him as the best AD carry in the LPL. Last year, or at least at the beginning of the year, I would have called him easily the best AD carry in the world. I was very high on him on this channel. You can go check that out. But I don't know if I quite stand on that anymore. I think Ruler would certainly have an argument to discuss there. But Viper's certainly in the conversation, even though he started to struggle. I think this team often loses. You know who doesn't often lose is Viper. Even when Viper's in these 1v2 situations where Mako's off roaming mid lane and they're not getting anything, he's still able to maintain CS leads, which is ridiculously impressive. He's one of the better AD carries in the world at not receiving resources and still being able to get to that late game spot where he can just win you the game by himself. There aren't a lot of AD carries in the world that I think do that very consistently. Viper does that better than anyone. So yeah, no problems with Viper here. My problems are really with the rest of the team. You see a lot of 6s on the rest of the teams, you know, a 7 for Mako. You wouldn't expect them at 8th, but they certainly play below this. Let's talk about Mako first. This is someone who I would have talked to you, if you would have asked me at the beginning of the year, I would have told you he was the best support in the world, or one of the best supports in the world. And he's not even close to that anymore. He has completely fallen off a cliff in 2022. I'm not exactly sure what the cause for that is, but his ability to roam and create plays on the map have just been so unsuccessful, and he gets caught out way, way, way more than he did last year. His map feel has just gone way down. There's really no other way for me to put it. I don't feel very confident in his ability to actively execute like game-breaking plays across the map like he did last year. I'm not sure if a lot of that is just the meta's changing, like Leona's no longer in meta. That was a huge pick for Mako last year, all year long, and obviously no Leona I think hurts him, but generally speaking, I still think Mako should translate well, and he just hasn't. As for the rest of this team, Scout has the other player that I think has really taken a pretty big step back this year. Scout has lost lane like a lot. And I know he's still a late game team fighter. He's never really been the guy who's going to dominate you in lane and then, you know, just carry that into late game and be the hyper carry. He's always been more of a utility player, but losing lane is a problem, and Scout loses lane a lot nowadays. It's certainly not something you would have expected from a person who just won World Finals MVP last year, but yeah, he certainly has not had a great start to the year. He still is a good team fighter. That's why he ranks so high, but his laning stats are bad, and I don't see them getting much better. Similar thing for Flandre, except kind of the opposite. Flandre is that much more aggressive style, where he does want to win lane and kind of translate that, but this meta just really doesn't suit him for that. Top lane's not a meta right now where you can just win lane and translate that into winning game. The aggressive picks that we were seeing last year just aren't there anymore, and I think for Flandre, that is a little bit of a problem. He definitely can overextend himself too much. He's definitely lost this team games this year, but he's also won them games to an extent. You know, he hasn't been perfect. To pretend that he's been perfect is not true, but he's been fine, not a problem. Similar with JJ, I think JJ's been a little bit more consistent in the jungle. I think there are games where he has really carried the lifeless husk of this team across the finish line. But there are also games where he just doesn't show up. Again, a reason that he falls down to number 6 here, which is much lower than, you know, all of these players I think are much lower rated than they would have been at the start of the year. But, you know, I think JJ at least has shown the ability to still carry games. I think really what this EDG team is looking for is consistency out of their, even just their regular players. Like, Flandre and Scout just need to be more consistent in lane. Both of them have a track record of losing lane this year, and that has to change because it's creating very little power points for JJ on the map. Viper has been really good, but this team doesn't often want to gank bot lane. They often want to gank elsewhere. Top lane was really where they wanted to gank a lot at the beginning of the year. I think that would continue to be an option. Bringing Mako up for a mid lane play is an option as well, but really, like, all of these guys need to start maintaining laning stats and being able to play proactively early in order for me to start believing that that is going to amount in anything. Because no matter how hard they try, if they try to make those plays and nothing happens, then you're not gaining anything and you're just giving the other team the opportunity to do whatever they want on the map. So, yeah, do I hope EDG gets better? Yes. Do I think they're the worst of the teams that are competing and jockeying for a world spot right now? Honestly, yes. Like, I do. I really think that they're at the bottom. That's why they come in at 8 here. Obviously, I'm not counting BLG into that. I know BLG probably thinks of themselves as a team that should be contending for Worlds, but until they get into any sort of predicament where they're even contending for playoffs, it's hard for me to put them in that category. So, yes, I think EDG is probably at the bottom of this group of teams that is kind of clawing on the outside for a world spot right now. They have a lot to fix to get there. Obviously, we know they can get there, but they really have to show it before I believe it. Coming in at number 7 here in my power rankings, another team that really wants to hit Worlds expectations. Definitely we're getting to that point where every team left has those. We're talking about LNG Esports here. LNG is a really interesting roster. They've got some really talented players that just haven't been able to put it together for some reason. The macro has not clicked on this team. They've got Ale in the top lane, Tarzan in the jungle, Donby in the mid lane, Light at AD carry, and Iwandi and Lumao kind of splitting some time there at support. Mostly Iwandi though now. They're good. They're fine. That's really how I feel about LNG. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Let's start talking about the 2 big players that you're expecting to be the carries of this team, Tarzan and Donby, your jungle mid duo here. When they formed together, you would have expected this team to be like top 2, top 3, because Donby's coming off of a year where he re-solidified himself as one of the best mids in the world. Tarzan was arguably the best jungler in the world last year, and these two just have not clicked. They really haven't clicked as teammates together, and that's really tough to see because both of them are really good players. Tarzan's taken a little bit of a step back this year. He went from like the easy number 1 choice for me to, you know, he's still really, really good, but maybe not the best jungler in the LPL level territory. And Donby, honestly, has not been super impressive on this LNG team. I do think that he has these games where he just wins, and I still think, honestly, if you look at the course of LNG season, Donby's been the most important player to this team, but he hasn't been the world beater that I think you would really want him to be. These two together I thought would be phenomenal. Obviously, Donby very low resource, Tarzan very high resource as a jungler. I figured that was a perfect combination. Tarzan could kind of go around the map, fight whoever he wanted, and Donby would be there to help him. But it really hasn't worked out like that. Donby's definitely been the one who's receiving a lot more of the gold, and that is really intriguing. It's really not a style that we've seen Donby play at all his entire career, being kind of the focal point of ganks and things like that. So certainly something worth looking out for, but Tarzan and Donby are still really, really great players. Just because they're not synergizing the exact way I thought they would, doesn't mean that it's bad. As for bot lane, Light and Iwandi were phenomenal last year. Light took a really big step up in spring, in my opinion, and then took a little bit of a step back down in summer so far. He was really mechanically phenomenal in spring. I'm not sure if it was just him and Lumao's connection, because Lumao was playing a lot more in spring than Iwandi was, but Light, ever since Iwandi rejoined the starting lineup, has honestly gone back to being kind of a passive player for this team and not the focal point. Not exactly sure what to take from that. Lumao was honestly someone who roamed a lot more than Iwandi does, so I really don't know what to tell you, but Light has, you know, he's fine. He's still a really good bot laner, and there are still games that are won because of Light here on LNG, but it's just not nearly the amount that there was in spring, when this team was looking like an absolute world beater at the beginning of that split. A lot of it was because Light was secretly looking like one of the best AD carries in the world, and he just has not looked like that recently. Iwandi's fine. I see a lot of talk on, you know, Reddit or Twitter or whatever, your social media of choice, right? That Iwandi's like so good, and I can't believe they played Lumao for so long, and obviously I've fought back on that opinion on this channel a bit. I think Iwandi and Lumao really aren't that far apart in terms of actual skill. Both of them are relatively upper mid-tier LPL supports. I don't think either of them are superstars. And I think that's been proven now that Iwandi has played a pretty large sample size here in summer and has honestly not been terrific. Both of them are just fine players. They're not great, they're not bad, they're just there. You know, you really, whichever one you want to play, I think comes down to how you see Light as your carry here. If you see Light as someone who plays better with one or the other, then I think you definitely play the one that he plays better with. But Outside of that, there really isn't this big noticeable difference between those two for me. And they both come in around 6 or 7 on the support tier list. They wouldn't be that different. And then you got Ale in the top lane, the darling of Worlds last year, someone who I think really impressed on the international stage. He just hasn't, this is not his meta. Like, there's really no other way to put it, is he drops all the way down to number 8 for me in terms of top laners because he's been bad this year. And it's mostly because these picks that he was really good on, the Wukong or anything like that, they're just not super playable in the top lane right now. Obviously, Wukong's phenomenal, but just not in the top lane. They're not super playable in the top lane, and when he's put on these more passive picks, it's not his style, and he definitely looks worse on it. He's not a tank player, and that's something that this LNG team, really wants him to do, so maybe if they get back to a little bit more of Ale on carries and Light on carries, and Doan playing, a more supportive mid-style pick, you can have Wukong in the jungle or whatever super aggro jungler that's popular right now that you want to pick for Tarzan, Bel'Veth, whatever, right? You can have that. It just doesn't seem like the direction that this team wants to go for some reason or another. And Ale has definitely been the one who has, I think, suffered the most from that. But as a team, they've been very inconsistent. They win games that they shouldn't win. They lose games that they shouldn't lose as well. And a lot of that is just down to the fact that sometimes this team shows up and sometimes they don't. The game plan has mostly been to focus around Doan and kind of play with him. I'm not exactly sure, like I said, if that's the direction I would go, but do I think that there's a chance they can make Worlds? Yeah, I mean, this team definitely has the talent to make Worlds. So far, they've not shown the drive and the ability to do that. I think this is really the last team that has, major question marks on their ability to actually win games and make Worlds, but I still definitely think that there is a chance, just not one that I would actively predict. Moving on to my number 6 team in my power rankings, we really start to get into the teams that I think realistically have shown a propensity for winning and an ability to potentially even make Worlds this year. I definitely think the top 4 are a step away, but starting at number 6, we are looking at FunPlus Phoenix FPX, who have really burst onto the scene in the last few weeks ever since getting their full roster in here. Their full roster is looking like Summit in the top lane, Clid in the jungle, Care in the mid lane, LWX at AD carry, and then Hang at support. Summit coming in has reinvigorated this team. Their record may not look like they're one of the best teams in the league, but they are on one of the biggest hot streaks in the league. They lost, I think they were 1-5 after their first 6 series, and it was like, oh no, and obviously, go back and watch those videos. I was not pulling the plug on them. I was saying they have literally only played the best teams in the league. They have a very easy schedule coming up. They are likely going to go on this major hot streak. And of course, they started doing that. But they also, I kind of underestimated how good the rest of their schedule still was. It's not like they're still not playing good teams. They've played good teams, and they've started beating the good teams. Not just because of Summit coming in, but I certainly think that was the tipping point for this team. Let's talk about him coming in first. This is the MVP of Spring Split in North America. Let's not forget that. I know a lot of people are going to be blinded by the fact that he wasn't good in the playoffs. And yes, he had some problems in the playoffs, but let's not forget, this was the MVP of Spring Split in North America. This was the best player in that entire region. And I know LCS is LOL, but it's still an accomplishment. And he comes in and he looks really, really solid here in the LPL so far. He hasn't had to be a carry, which I think is good for this team. He's just enabled the rest of this team to do what they want because he offers so much in that top lane in terms of pressure that it gives a player like Clid a lot more room to breathe. And boy, howdy, has Clid been phenomenal ever since Summit joined this team. This was somebody who I was really excited about at the beginning of the year, and he had a pretty awful spring. There's really no other way to put it. He was super duper duper disappointing in spring. Definitely underperforming, and then he's just had a huge breakout in the last few weeks. He's been probably the best player in the league over the past 2-week stretch. So my ranking of 7 for him is going to meet somewhere in the middle. Right now he's playing a top 2 to 3 jungler in the region. For most of the year he was a lot closer to 10 or 11. So having him here at 7 I think is a little bit of a compromise. I think he'll probably be a little higher than this by the end of the year, but I certainly don't think he'll be as high as the best jungler in the league or anything like that. He's been very, very, very good, though. And then you talk about having the best bot lane in the LPL, or at least one of them, up for debate. Them and RNG, I think, are definitely the two that duel it out for best bot lanes in the region. And I don't think a lot of people talk about that for FPX. I think LWX is, criminally underrated when it comes to the conversation of best AD carries in the world. he has consistently been the one to give FPX their wins throughout this year. He's taken a little bit of a step back ever since Summit joined and Clid has actually just taken over the games, but go watch Summer and go watch an FPX win. I promise you, LWX is the one that is propelling them to that win. He is easily one of the best AD carries in the world. He comes in at number 3 in my AD carry tier list. I wish I could put him higher, but really, that feels about right. He comes in just below Viper and Gala. I think that's pretty good company to be in. So, him and Hang have a phenomenal synergy. Hang has made this team fundamentally better at every level. Obviously, he came in the offseason, and he is also my 3rd ranked support. I think he's been criminally underrated. This bot lane has been so great for FPX that even in their losses, they often look like a very, very strong point of the map. They win lane. LWX is one of the best late game team fighters. Hang has phenomenal macro decisions. I really think these two are a genuine championship level, like a world championship level bot lane, if you can get the rest of the team around them to start playing. The only weakness that I think this team really has is going to be Care in the mid lane, and I do think he is a weakness. He comes in at number 14 on my mid lane rankings. He certainly hasn't proven anything to me yet. Obviously, he's barely played, did not start out, being this team's starting mid laner at the beginning of the year, but this is a position that they've been struggling to fill all year long, and Care looks okay for now. He has good synergy with Clid, which makes me feel like this is going to work out. I just don't think he's very mechanically talented. If he can be that more supportive player, though, someone who doesn't need a ton of resources, you can rely on Clid, you can rely on LWX, you can rely on Hang to win you games. I certainly think Care isn't going to hold them back from being a world's caliber team. I actually look at this team very similarly to how I looked at 2021 World Elite, WE, if you will. I think this team has a very similar outlook to that team where if they can get over the weakness of their mid laner, they can be one of the best teams in the world. And I really, really genuinely believe that. So hopefully they can do that. Like I said, Clid and LWX and Hang are phenomenal. Summit has proven to be an upgrade in the top lane here. And then Care, I just think, needs to not be a negative for this team to be very good. They're on the up and up, and hopefully they continue to do that. Do I think they can make Worlds? Yeah, I absolutely do. If things really start to go right for this team, I could see them starting to knock off all the teams above them. It's just, I have to see that before I believe it. I've said that for a few teams, but I think when it comes to upside, FPX is by far the team with the most upside that we have talked about so far. This bot lane is pretty much untouched in terms of skill, like I said, other than the defending MSI champions. And if Clid continues on this roll, I mean, this team is, it's phenomenal. So hopefully they can continue that because I really do like this roster a lot. Moving on to number 5 in my power rankings, we get to a team that I've been really interested to talk about, and that is Weibo Gaming. Here, coming in at number 5, maybe a little higher than some people expected, but man, the LPL is really hit or miss, and this is a team that's all or nothing, and I think when they're all in, like, they are, as good as this is. So let's talk about what their lineup is looking like. It's looking like the Shy in the top lane, SOFM in the jungle, Angel in the mid lane, Huanfeng at AD carry, and then On at support. I think this team has a lot of advantages over other teams. I've talked about this in the recaps, but I think really when you talk about Weibo, you have to talk about the fact that all of their players very much seem to be on the same page in terms of how they want to play the game, which is aggro, aggro, aggro all the time, all the time, all the time. I think no team encapsulates like the traditional LPL mindset more than Weibo Gaming right now, and that's what makes them so fun to watch. But that also is what makes them so versatile and so difficult to pin down on a power ranking tier list kind of thing like this. So let's go ahead and talk about their advantages. I think the best place on the map for them is probably bot lane. And most of that is due to the fact that On, I think, has like very quietly emerged as one of the best supports in the world this year. I know a lot of people are really surprised that Sword Art's not in. On is, quite frankly, like 4 times the player Sword Art is at this point in time. And I'm really glad that they stuck with him at the beginning of this year because he had a rough last year replacing Sword Art. And they stuck with him, they gave him some more game time, and he has really repaid them. He's repaid them basically in full by being this team's best player throughout the year. And he definitely encompasses that very aggressive mindset, but it's to the extent where I think he creates a lot more advantages for this team than he does deficits. He's been really, really phenomenal for them. And he has a good synergy with Huanfeng as well here. Both of them, I think, are good players. Obviously, I think Huanfeng has great synergy with Sword Art, and I was always worried about playing On here just because it seems like Huanfeng always played better with Sword Art in than he did with On in, and I still find that to be relatively true, but if On's going to give you this, it's probably worth it. Huanfeng's still a good player, still a good, a really solid AD carry. Not one of the best in the league. A very aggressive player that will get himself caught out sometimes, but will win you team fights late game. One of the more mechanically skilled late game team fighters in the world. Proven that on the international stage multiple times, so that's definitely not up for debate anymore, in my opinion. He's shown that in the LPL this past year as well. One of the more mechanical late game team fighters just there. It's just about getting there for him. And I think sometimes that can be a little difficult. Does spend a lot of time out of lane, even though he spends quite a bit of time in lane as well. A lot of it is spent out of lane. And I think that definitely hurts Huanfeng's ranking here, but he's just good. He's a solid player that you can definitely go to Worlds with. You have Angel here in the mid lane. Honestly, Angel's a very difficult case to talk about because he's the prototypical, like, I'm not the focal point of this roster, but I'm not a negative either player, right? He's a good player on a very good team that he looks really good. He's the best version of a player like Yeji that we were talking about earlier, where on a good team he looks great, on a bad team he might look bad. He's on a good team right now, so he looks really good, but he's not a player who has that like takeover instinct. He's a much more supportive style player that is going to play around his team. SOFM, I think, unfairly falls into that category. He's a very resource heavy player. He just doesn't play carries. He plays tanks, but he likes to get super ahead on those tanks, and he likes to play for resources. Very much someone who is willing to fight you early. That can be a positive. It can certainly be a negative for this team. We've seen that in recent weeks. SOFM has certainly lost them games this year, and he's lost them a lot of games in recent weeks as well. A lot of the games they've lost in summer have been because of SOFM, but he's still a very good player with a very unique champion pool and a very unique style of play that you just don't see very often, especially nowadays. So I do think he's a positive for this team overall, just not consistent in any way, shape, or form. And if you're talking about not consistent, you're talking about the Shy in the top lane. I'm at the point with the Shy where I don't know if it's fair to say that I'm out on the Shy, but it's fair to say that it's just hard for me as an analyst to grade him because he is so good when he's good and he's so bad when he's bad that he is the ultimate version. If Angel is the ultimate version of Yeji, the Shy is the ultimate version of Biu on WE, where when he if you give him resources and invest in him and get him ahead, he will just 1v9, like, win the game no matter what. He has the mechanics for that. But when he's behind, he certainly doesn't know how to play from behind because he doesn't try. He just continuously tries to play from ahead, even when behind, and he just gets himself into bigger holes. So that's kind of how this Weibo team just plays in general. They don't play very well from behind, but they're very, very mechanically talented to the point where they get behind so little that honestly, I think for the most part, it doesn't matter. Against the best teams in the world, it probably will, but right now, I don't have a ton of concerns about that. The outlook of this team, they're going to want to make Worlds. I'm not sold on them being a Worlds team. I actually think the ceiling for this team is a little bit lower than that of something like an FPX, and if I was a little bit bolder, I would have put FPX higher than them in my power rankings, but wasn't quite that bold. I still think Weibo is very good, and like I said, they can beat anybody on any day. That includes the best teams in the world. And so, yes, do I think that they are potentially a Worlds team? They absolutely could be if they get fire at the right time, right going into the playoffs or anything like that. But the volatility of this team just keeps them out of that upper echelon for me. To me, they are the highest team on this power ranking outside of the upper tier of teams. So I think they're going to be comfortable in that range, but hopefully they can prove me wrong and just get a little bit more consistent. Probably not, though. It's Weibo. All right, now we're jumping into the top four, the four teams that I think are in the Worlds contention, at least my favorites to make Worlds, as far as I'm concerned right now. Coming at number 4, a very shocking number 4 for people who haven't watched my weekly recap videos, and it's going to be our reigning MSI champions, RNG, Royal Never Give Up, coming in at number 4 here. Some people are going to find that very, very low, but I think their performance so far in summer, after MSI has proven that they're probably closer to this than they are to number 1. Their lineup is looking like Breathe in the top lane, Wei in the jungle, Xiaohu in the mid lane, Gala at ADC, and then Ming at support. There's a lot of good to this team. We know that. There's a reason they just won the LPL. There is a reason that they just won MSI. It's because this team has the potential to be the best in the world. And I think anybody that I talk about from this point onward has the potential to be the best team in the world on their day. But let's talk about what makes this team good. They have the best bot lane in the world. I think, I'm not crazy for saying that. I really don't think I'm insane for saying that, but they have the best bot lane in the world. And I think Gala is just so good. Like, mechanically speaking, I don't think anybody can touch Gala in the world. He just sometimes doesn't have that instinct, that take over the game level mentality. He's a very, very good player, but I want to see him play more aggressive. And I know Ming is the one in this lane that is typically setting the pace. That's why Gala falls at number 2 for me and not number 1. That's basically the only reason, the only separator between him and Viper, in my opinion. Ming does fall at number 1. I think you can really make a case that Ming is the best support in the world. Him and Keria, I think, duke it out quite frequently, but for Ming, I think he has everything that you want out of a support. He is a phenomenal shot caller. He has phenomenal macro sense of where he needs to be at any point in time. He does a great job of roaming. He's wonderful in the 2v2s. There's just nothing that Ming doesn't do at a world-class level, and I think that's what, for me, makes him the best support in the world. Him and Gala together as a duo is unstoppable in lane if they are both clicking. Gala also, another reason he comes in at number 2 is he's sometimes a little inconsistent. He can have some games where he's just not there. I do attribute that a little bit to the fact that he doesn't have that aggressiveness instinct in him, but I don't think it's a problem. Again, like, talent-wise, he's right up there with anybody you could even ask for in the world. You've also got, I don't know, just Xiaohu in the mid lane here. Yes, I know the meme. Spring Xiaohu happened, and he won MSI, and great, and now it's time for Summer Xiaohu, where he takes a step back, but he's still a very good player, and even in their wins and losses, he's been good. He certainly hasn't been as good as he was in Spring, at least so far this year. He has plenty of time to turn around, but coming in at number 3 in rankings is certainly not a low ranking. He comes in only behind, arguably, the 2 best players in the world right now, in Knight and Rookie, in my opinion, which we will get to both of them later, but to put Xiaohu at 3, I certainly don't think is a disrespect to Xiaohu. I certainly would like to see him be a little bit more consistent. He loses a little bit more than I think the 2 above him do, and that's the reason he comes in at 3rd, but his takeover game performances are just as high as I think those other 2 are. He is arguably the best, like, side lane player in the world at any position. I think he showed that this year, he showed that last year, he showed that the year before. That's just kind of his game plan. He's a great team fighter too, but the 1-3-1s that this team can throw out was a big reason why I think they wanted to bring Breathe in here, and I think that definitely helped Xiaohu. But let's speak on Breathe. Obviously, the only change that this team has made from winning MSI to now is bringing Breathe in the top lane, and for me, Breathe is the best top laner in the LPL. He has pretty consistently been phenomenal for the past few years on teams that have radically underperformed. He finally gets on a team here that I think has talent around him that isn't going to disappoint. I really hope he can live up to that because I do see him as the most talented top laner in the LPL. Of course, I've said it all the time throughout this video. Top lane really isn't a position right now where you can completely take over the game on, but still, Breathe is a great tank player. He's a great secondary carry as well, so I'm not super worried about it. Like I said, I think he complements Xiaohu really well in the fact that this team loves to 1-3-1, and I think both Breathe and Xiaohu are very, very good at that playstyle. My biggest disappointment for this team so far in summer has definitely been Wei in the jungle, who I definitely think has taken the biggest step back for RNG. In the games that they've lost, in the series that they've lost against some of the top teams, Wei has been the one that I think has underperformed the most, and I'm not really sure what that is. He has struggled to perform on the international stage before as well. I'm not convinced that he's like a top-tier jungler in the world. That's why he comes in at number 4 for me in my jungle rankings. I still think he's a great player. Like, 4 is not a slight by any means, but just I worry about his ability to maintain being a world-class jungler in a system like RNG's that values jungle very highly. I think there have been times where he has been out-jungled, especially the split by Karsa and by Tian. We've definitely seen some games where more experienced, more macro-based junglers can take advantage of his ability to just, like his lack of macro knowledge. Really, it does come down to the fact that he just needs to make better decisions, and he needs to be more aware of where he is at any point in time, when he can fight, where his mid lane wave is, when he wants to fight, etc., etc. You know, the big stuff that you have to know as a jungler at this level. I still think he can learn that, but he's going to have to prove to learn that before I put him into the top 3. As for the rest of this team, like the outlook of this team, we know that their ceiling is best in the world because they just won MSI. They just proved that they were the best team in spring in the world. They won the LPL, then they won MSI. You can make all these arguments that, if they had played Victory 5 in the LPL finals, they wouldn't have won. If T1 had been in actual form at MSI, they wouldn't have won. You can make all of these excuses, but at the end of the day, this team just won MSI, and so they have to be considered one of the best teams in the world. I just think they have a few things that they really need to, a few more question marks for me than the teams above them in order of like full macro sense of, I don't know what I'm saying. I'm trying to make excuses for why this team isn't top 3, but at the end of the day, if you want to have them at number 1, sure, I get it. If you want to have them at number 4, I get it. These top 4 teams are so difficult to separate that for me, just right now, they fall at the bottom, but next week I could have my mind changed completely. All right, moving on to the top 3 teams here. Coming in at number 3 for me is going to be LGD Gaming, a very fun roster who is playing some of the best League of Legends that they have played in their entire careers. Let's go over what they have. In the top lane, they've got 369. In the jungle, it's Kanavi. In the mid lane, Yagao. AD carry is Hope. And support is Missing. I really can't say anything about this team other than the fact that I think almost everyone on this roster is playing some of the best League of Legends that they have ever played. Let's start in the top lane with 369. Obviously someone who is known as like a weak side, like not a losing lane top laner, like someone who can be stable, someone who you don't have to give resources to and he's going to be fine. But man, JDG started giving him resources and he started winning them games by a lot, actually. He's jumped up in my top lane rankings. If you want to have 369 as the best top laner in the LPL right now, I honestly don't disagree with you. He's played like the best top laner in the LPL so far this split. I think it's just about consistency. I want to see it for an entire split. I want to see it in playoffs, mostly. I want to see this team be able to step up and really perform at that level against the best competition when it matters the most. But for 369, like, you couldn't ask for a better season so far. He's been phenomenal. Kanavi I have as the number 1 jungler in the LPL. Really, to me right now, that's like uncontestable. He's been so good for JDG. He is the reason this team is in the top 3. Like, I love Yagao, I love Hope, I love Missing, I love 369, but if they don't have a player like Kanavi, they are not 8-1. They are not a Worlds team in the hardest region in the world. Like, what he offers to this team is completely invaluable as a carry and also as a phenomenal facilitator for pretty much everybody else. Everybody else has stepped up a lot, but I think that's because Kanavi has really mastered the art of not only getting himself ahead, but also getting everyone on his team ahead, whether it be top lane, whether it be mid lane, whether it be bot lane. He has been sensational this year, and I can only hope that he continues to keep that up. You have Yagao in the mid lane, who I made the statement of in this last week's weekly review that I think he's having the best year of his career. And I don't even think it's that close. Like, Yagao's been on this team for a while, but he's unlocked something this year that I don't think he's really had in his repertoire for a while. He can be the focal point for this team now. And that's kind of crazy to say, because it's not like he's been a bad player, but he's never really been like the guy who will carry this team. It was always Kanavi. It was Zoom in the top lane at a time, right? Like, you always played through that top side and then had Yagao as a little bit more of a supportive player in the mid. But they've been putting him on some more aggressive picks, and he has really rewarded them by carrying this team in a couple games, obviously with the help of Kanavi. But yeah, honestly, big shout out to Yagao. He's having probably the best year of his career. And then really what I think turned this team's fortunes around after they really struggled to start off in spring was the addition of Hope here at AD carry. Bringing him in has completely changed how this team has played. He is a phenomenal AD carry, someone who has really been a diamond in the rough, a great find for JDG here, because he's come in and immediately made this team one of the best in the world. And his chemistry with Missing is nearly perfect. They are one of the strongest just straight up 2v2s in the league, in the world, probably. And I think a lot of that just has to do with the fact of how mechanically good Hope is. He's also really smart. He doesn't make a lot of mistakes, which is something I see young ADCs do a lot, is they will try to take over the game a little too much and they'll die for it. Hope is really smart about where he needs to be and making sure that he's available for those teamfight moments that his team needs him in. He fills his role nearly perfectly on this roster. And then Missing also, I don't think, gets nearly enough credit for how well he's done on this JDG team. Obviously someone who was really good last year as well, but has really stepped up his game ever since Hope joined. I really think that's when those two started to mesh really well, and has been consistently one of the better supports and just better bot lanes in the LPL in general the last few months. So shout out to Hope, shout out to Missing, shout out to this whole team. The upside of this team is obviously one of the best teams in the world. Like I said, everybody from this point onward is going to be that. I think there is a chance this team does cool off, maybe more so than RNG or any of the two teams above them. I think there is a chance that maybe they cool off a bit and start to come back down to earth, but there's also just as real of a chance, and this is honestly what I'm more expecting, that this team really is just genuinely legit. Like, 369 is this good. Yagao has stepped up. Hope and Missing can be one of the better bot lanes in the world. And then Kanavi's arguably the best jungler in the world right now. I really think that that could be legit, and we could see this JDG team go to Worlds and really surprise a lot of people. That's what I'm hoping for, but obviously nothing is set in stone. This team looks so good right now, and I think all of us can just say that we're hoping they maintain that. All right, that's going to bring us to our top 2 teams in the power rankings. Obviously, no surprises if you had watched my weekly recap video, but just in case you hadn't, this is going to reveal both 2 and 1, but it's appropriate that we said the top 2 teams, because coming in at number 2 here is Top Esports, a team that I've been, I'm very proud of where I put this team in my preseason predictions. They've really paid off in terms of an investment as an analyst in support. So let's go over what the roster is looking like. It's looking like Wayward in the top lane, Tion in the jungle, Knight in the mid lane, Jackie Love as the ADC, and then Mark as the support. I'm going to say it. There's going to be some controversy to this statement, but I'm going to say it. You can take your Chovy, you can take your Showmaker, you can take your Rookie. Knight is the best player in the world. I truly believe that Knight is the best League of Legends player in the world, and he's a big reason why Top Esports ranks so high for me. Not to say the rest of this roster is bad, but Knight is really that damn good. He's someone who I think you could put on any team in any region in the world, and he will look like the best player. His mechanics are insane. His macro's very good. That was something he was always criticized for when he was winning MVPs a couple of years ago. He's really improved his ability to impact the map and not only just his lane. This guy is phenomenal. Like, there's nothing that you want in a League of Legends mid laner that Knight doesn't give you. He is essentially the perfect player. So for me, he comes in as the number 1 mid laner. We'll talk about Rookie in a bit. I think they're close, but for me, Knight comes in as the number 1 player in the LPL, the number 1 mid laner in the LPL. He is just a complete game-breaking level talent, and a big reason why this team comes in as the number 2 team in the power rankings. Tion, I think also, what a career resurgence for Tion here on top so far. He has been phenomenal for this team. A lot of people were really concerned about him because of those wrist injuries. This is something that has kept Tion out of action for the past 2 years. He's played a little bit, but he's had to take some pretty major breaks because he's had these wrist issues, and it's definitely affected his performance. He comes over here to top, gets to play with Knight, and he has immediately reinserted himself in the best junglers in the world conversation. When he is on, I'm pretty sure there is nobody in the world that's better than him. Even Kanavi. We just talked about Kanavi. When he is like really clicking on all cylinders, I don't think anybody can touch Tion. So yeah, that jungle mid duo just might be the best in the world. Then you talk about this bottom lane. This bottom lane is where top starts to get interesting because you have Jackie Love and you have Mark, the 2 most aggressive players on the planet. There's no other way to put it, right? Jackie Love is one of those players that before Tion was really like fully complete, ready to go in spring, Jackie Love was kind of the one that they were focusing on a lot. And he was either going to win you the game or he was going to lose you the game by himself. And Mark certainly attributes himself to that because both of them are so aggressive and they tempt fate so much. They are so mechanically talented. You could make the argument to me that Jackie Love is the most mechanically talented player in the world. And I kind of agree with that. I think Jackie Love, at his best, is the best player in the world. But there are so many times where Jackie Love just dies over and over again and actively loses your team the game, even with some of the best players in the world around him, that it's hard for me to rank him higher than 4th. Mark is in that similar boat. However, I feel like he doesn't have the same level of impact on the game, so he's actually going to fall all the way down to 9 for me. That's not a huge, Mark sucks kind of thing. I think there are the 9 to 4 or 5 range of supports for me are so close, and you can honestly flip-flop all of them if you want, but for me, Mark comes in at number 9 just because he, like I said, he tempts fate a lot and he dies a lot for no reason. Trying to get wards in places he knows he shouldn't be, his macro sense is a little questionable, but certainly this bot lane can offer you a lot of positives when they are working. When they are working and completely clicking and everything is going well, they could very well be the best bot lane in the world. And then you have Wayward in the top lane, a very pleasant surprise for this top esports team who was relying a lot on Zoom, I think, for them to really be good this year, and then Zoom fizzled out, and they're like, oh, guess we'll have to call on our academy top laner here in Wayward, our LDL top laner. Oops, turns out Wayward's one of the best top laners in the LPL. He's been phenomenal for them, not only as a weak side player, but with resources as well. This is a guy who can win you games at the LPL level. They are very, very, very happy to have him, and I think he fits perfectly within this roster of incredibly talented players from top to bottom that all feel like they have the same goal in mind, maybe with the exception of Jackie Love and Mark, who can sometimes just say, like, F it and just run it down. But, you know, when you have Jackie Love and when you have Mark, you have to expect that that's just going to happen sometimes. But as for the outlook of this team, more so I think than even RNG and JDG, like, this team has the potential to just break every sort of conception of best team in the world. Like, this is a team that if it comes to Worlds time and they sweep their way through Worlds and just win Worlds finals without dropping a game, I wouldn't be that surprised, because when this team is working, no one can beat them. I truly believe that no one can beat them if all of them are playing at their best. But Knight is someone who has definitely shown struggles on an international stage. Tian is someone who has shown struggles on an international stage ever since he won the World Championship. Jackie Love and Mark are super inconsistent. Wayward is a rookie. You have some question marks about this team's ability to perform at the biggest stage, but for me, I'm more confident, I think, in them than almost any other team in the world, because when you have Knight, when you have Tian, I think everything else just falls into place for you. Moving on to our number 1 team in my power rankings at this point, process of elimination should tell you who that is. If you didn't already know, it is going to be Victory 5 here for this roster. Let's go ahead and talk about what they've got, because this team is awesome and they're so fun to watch. They've got Rich in the top lane, Karsa in the jungle. Well, Karsa and Bao in the jungle, I should say. Rookie at mid lane, although Dream played most of the season so far and he looked phenomenal. Photic at ADC, and the PP God at support, our Lord and Savior himself. Wow, like, this team is just so good. It's almost unfair how good this team is in terms of they're mechanically unbelievable, right? Like, you have Rookie, PP God, Photic, like, all these players who you would consider, like, genuine mechanical beasts. And the macro of this team is unbeatable. Like, whatever, I don't know if it's just Karsa and PP God or Rookie adding to it, but, like, everybody who plays on this team, I feel like, looks better than they actually are, just because the atmosphere on this team is perfect. Like, the macro on this team is perfect. They play the map well. Once they get a lead, it is impossible for them to lose it. I really just think this team is about as good as it gets in the LPL. I talked about Knight in the last segment and about how I think he's the best player in the world. Rookie's right there with him, right? There's a reason Rookie won Spring MVP overnight. It's because Rookie is also genuinely phenomenal. I think that gap is pretty close. Obviously, for me, I took Knight, but it's not like Rookie is very far off. Any team in the league would be blessed to have a player as good as Rookie. Victory 5 has to be ecstatic that they were able to pick him up in the offseason. I mean, this is a surefire first ballot Hall of Famer, obviously former world champion here on Invictus Gaming. He's everything you could want. He is a player who has that takeover instinct where he can win you games by himself, but he's also probably the most unselfish star player in the world in terms of, oh, you need him to not get a gank for like 6 games in a row. He's going to be super happy with that because the rest of the team is winning. Like, Rookie is the dream, the absolute dream. No pun intended, actually. Completely no pun intended. I just thought about that. In the mid lane, he plays off of Karsa so well. And Karsa's obviously great here. Him and Bao split time in the jungle, but they play Karsa for their big games. So I'm talking about Karsa mostly here. I think both of them are around the 5 spot. Karsa's just so good at controlling the map and making sure his laners have a chance to express their skill. While Karsa might not be the most mechanically talented player in the world anymore, he makes up for that with probably having the best macro of any jungler in the world, or at least in the LPL. He is able to control and manipulate pathings like nobody I have ever seen in this region specifically, because they're often so willing to fight. Karsa is willing to fight, don't get me wrong, but he's also very willing to just take a step back, let his laners do what they do best, and win the game. And I think that's a very good trait and a perfect trait for a team like this. You have Photic and PP God in the bot lane. Photic is just this mechanical genius that sometimes gets himself into trouble. They're really happy to have him, and I think he was a great pickup, a great find for this V5 team. I'm not sure he would look quite as good if you took him off of this Victory 5 team, but I am certain of saying that they're happy to have him. He looks a lot better, though, because he's got PP God next to him, our Lord and Savior himself. He's returned to form completely. You could make an argument, and I'm going to make this argument, that the PP God of 2022 is the best version that we've seen of him in his career, even better than 2020 when he first was on Victory 5. He has become this team's franchise player, the face of Victory 5 as a whole, and he deserves it because there are games that he just wins on his own, whether it be in the 2v2 or most often because he him and Karsa just have this ability to control every square inch of neutral ground on Summoner's Rift that I don't think any other team in the world can even come close to competing with. So, big shout out to PP God. Big shout out to Karsa for how well they genuinely have played this year and have played together. And then Photic, I think, gets thrown in there because his mechanical skill in team fights, his ability to position and to win late game, I think has really helped this team carve out an identity, even if they don't get an early lead, which they often do. But even if they don't, Photic is there because his positioning and his mechanics are just genuinely phenomenal. Very similar to what we said about, I think, like Danny in the LCS video, but just way better, honestly, in my opinion. And then you have Rich in the top lane. What the hell happened to Rich? Can someone explain this to me? He went from being easily the worst top laner in the LCK, and I'm sorry for the flame, I really don't mean it, to being, he was first team All-Pro in the LPL last split. Like, he was arguably the best top laner in the LPL last split. Him coming to this team has been a complete reawakening for himself, and I'm really happy to see that. Obviously, former Heroes of the Storm legend, Rich, now at the point where it's like, okay, well, maybe he's a League of Legends legend. This team should make Worlds. Like, they're the best team in the LPL right now. In my opinion, they are, between them and T1 and TES, like, those three teams, those are your three favorites to win Worlds, in my opinion, right now. But Victory 5 definitely deserves to be in that conversation. And until they prove otherwise, which I certainly don't think will be anytime soon, they're going to be in that conversation. I'm so happy for this roster. Everybody on this team is so likable. And really, like, I'm just happy to see them at the top because they just work so well together. This is what peak League of Legends looks like. All right, that is going to do it for my mid-season LPL player rankings. Up on the screen right now, you're going to see my list from 1 to 17 for all 5 positions in the LPL. If you can't tell, my voice is completely gone. This was almost 2.5 to 3 hours of recording for me to do. So if you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and leave a like. We do, I said this before, but these videos are a little bit higher effort to make than the weekly recaps in terms of just production value and everything like that. So if you could leave a like to let us know if you liked it or not, if you made it all the way to the end, I'd really appreciate it. This was a lot of work to do. And of course, if you have different opinions, I love to chat it up with you guys down in the comments section below. So leave, if you think Rookie should be ahead of Knight or whatever, right? Like, leave that down in the comment section. I'd love to have that debate with you guys, but I don't want to take up too much of your time. I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.